Let's there we go. Special thanks to everybody who decided to join us today for this month's meeting of the Emerging Technology Community of Interest. Just to kick things off, we have Alastair Thomson of ARPA-H, which what is that? Advanced Research. My gosh, I can't believe I forgot.
Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. It just rolls off the tongue.
There we go. Yeah, research agency funding and supporting transformative efforts in biomedical and health breakthroughs, right? Ranging from what molecular, societal. So basically solving any and all potential challenges tied to health. Your role now is senior advisor for data innovation. So you're really guiding all of the AI based decisions. And, I think the whole intention of this call was to sit down and talk a little bit about AI's space and that, AI's role in the healthcare space and how it can really serve as a transformative and world altering kind of solution to some degree, so or not. And I think that's kind of the context of our conversation, right? Is it really that great? Is it going to destroy us all and make everything fall apart, or is it just all one big overhyped kind of solution? And so I don't know if you want to introduce yourself and give a little bit of background and context on your role, and then give me some thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Alastair Thomson, and Senior Advisor for Data Innovation. That means I get to think hard thoughts for money, is the way I put it. But yeah, I'm really advising senior leadership at ARPA-H in all aspects of data, but particularly in AI, and making sure that we actually have an AI strategy that makes sense. We're seeing many proposed programs coming into us, which involve AI in one form or another, and so we're trying to be wise about how we use it. I particularly serve as technical leadership for the Biomedical Data Fabric program, which I'll mention a little bit later, which is one of the more interesting things, where I kind of get a do-over of work I did previously at NHLBI, building the NHLBI Biodata Catalyst program and the Recover data ecosystem. But there's a whole lot more that we do, and I'll talk a little bit about ARPA-H and what we do and how we do it, because we're different, and I'd like people in industry to know how we operate and how they can engage with us.
Yeah. Well, and I think before you get into that topic here, I mean, give me some of the I know you made the shift, right? You were at NHLBI, you were their CIO, fairly prominent position that you had for a number of years. What inspired you to kind of want to take on this new challenge within ARPA-H?
I think the thing that makes all of the ARPAs different is this very rigorous approach to taking risk. And NIH, has one risk profile that it can deal with, but ARPA-H is, and all the ARPAs, we assume that 80% of the programs that we run are going to fail, but the 20% of them are, the internet or miniaturized GPS or stealth, technology or whatever, that kind of level of impact. And so you'll see with the programs that we're funding, each one is a moonshot. Will it work? Will it not work? We've just announced the heart program, which is about 3D printing a functioning human heart in 2 days to deal with a transplantation. It's kind of, wow, no idea how we can do that, but if it works, you can just imagine the impact that it would have. And that was really what attracted me, to be able to do something that is truly game-changing. That could have, I've had I've been honored to have a tremendous impact on biomedical research for the last sort of 10-12 years, but this is just on another level. You're muted.
I said that's pretty great. You get to work with some of the coolest and most innovative new toys, and to a large degree you get to break them as much as you want, with the intention of trying to develop really, like you mentioned, right, groundbreaking transformative solutions that really change the way we live.
Exactly.
So that's amazing in and of itself. I mean, the implications of a self-made human heart could change a lot of things for people. And so I guess in that context, I know, Alastair, you wanted to show us some things, I think give us a breakdown of how ARPA-H works and some of the projects that are going on. Do you want to walk us a little bit through that, and then I'll chime in and jump in with some questions. And then I think what we could try to do is, as the audience, if you guys want to start putting some questions in the comments I'll try to get to him primarily towards the back end. If there's something very particularly relevant to what he's covering, we can jump in. I'll jump in and ask with you, but feel free to just write in the chat.
I'll try and keep an eye on it so that if you want to
Oh,
interrupt me,
I'll moderate that for you.
Okay, that's fine. I can see it. So, okay, so the title today is about AI in healthcare, and sort of the subtitle is this a game changer? Is it impending disaster, or is it just a yawn? And I'll get to the yawn in a little bit, but I want to first start just talking about ARPA-H and what we do. And so, ARPA-H is President Biden's vision for how to really move things forward in healthcare for everyone, avoiding disparities in inequities in healthcare, with, as I said, ideas so audacious that if only they could work. We sort of say if you can figure out how to do something, then don't come with that idea to us, because we want to deal with the things we have no idea how to do. Key things from us: we make decisions bottom up. We're driven by our program managers in the same way that DARPA and the other ARPA agencies are. We're a problem-focused organization, not necessarily a funding-focused organization. We use accelerated contracting mechanisms. We don't generally fund grants, but we do fund contracts and other transactions, which are basically commercial contracts, but outside the federal acquisition regulations. And I'm sure many of you heard about the announcement of our hub and spoke network, which we've, as a nod to the original ARPA, called ARPA-H, with 2 hubs in Texas and Boston, which are designed to really give us nimble ability to get funding into researchers and into businesses to push forward with game-changing research that will actually impact people. And then in case of the Boston hub, our Investor Catalyst hub, to help commercialize that. And work with investors to transition something from research into actual products, actual benefits for people as fast as we can. We've got a very lean and nimble management structure. We're allowed 210 federal staff total, of which 100 have to be program managers and actually directly running research. We have a hard limit on how much we can spend on administrative activities. 90% of our funding has to go to R&D. That means we have to be very lean, something which I'm quite enjoying after the rather heavyweight world at NIH. We also have flexibility in hiring. So we are not bound by the normal Title V GS scale in terms of the way that we hire. We can work outside those salary ranges so we can get people who are competitive with industry. But it also means that we're all term limited. So I'm on a 3-year term. If I'm successful, then they might give me another 3 years. But almost everyone there is term limited, which focuses the mind on, okay, how am I going to get stuff done? What do I need to get done in 3 years to demonstrate that this is valuable? We talk about the program managers in terms of this flywheel, and what it means is that our research portfolio is a reflection of the program managers. It's their ideas they're bringing in. It's very dynamic, and that the portfolio will and should change frequently. So typically a program manager comes in for 3 to 6 years, as I say, just like me, and their programs run from 2 to 4 years. They come in, they sort of give the wheel a spin and put energy into it, and then solutions come out of it. They move on and we bring in new people. That dynamism of turnover has been a characteristic of the ARPA agencies, and it's part of the reason that DARPA has been so successful, because it's constantly bringing in new ideas. And it's a very different way of operating. But as I say, that short term, it focuses your mind on actually delivering something that's worthwhile. In terms of the programs, program manager comes in, they pitch their program to leadership, and they get appointed, and then we plan the program. We then go and acquire performers, which is what we call awardees in NIH speak. Those performers carry out their innovative solutions. We'll often take multiple approaches to things. If we don't know how to solve something, we'll get 3 organizations in. They might be commercial, they might be academic, they might be a consortium. but we will try multiple approaches to things. And we monitor those approaches for performance. We are very metrics driven, very milestone driven. And you will see there, if we get partway through a milestone and we realize this is not working, we'll stop and we'll put the money where we think it's going to be beneficial. And then one of the big things is this sort of graduation process for these ideas. When they have come up with a solution that works, we work to transition them to industry or other partners. That might be government, it might be academia, depending on exactly what the innovation is. But the goal is to not just be the end is not just research. The end is getting it in the hands of the American people, so it's actually benefiting them. And as I said, that's really the role of the investor catalyst, to be able to, for instance, if we took a drug through phase 1 trials to demonstrate safety, maybe a bit of phase 2, then the investor catalyst would go and find investment partners and work to take it through phase 3 trials and get it into actual production. And I think, we've seen models like this that work. Operation Warp Speed, I think, is a good example of, where investment was made to transition. And we all saw the effect of that with the speed with which, RNA vaccines were made available. And so it's the same principle. Again, all of this has been modeled by DARPA and IARPA and ARPA-H. And so we're following in their footsteps with some minor differences, because we're healthcare and biomedical research, which is a bit different. The biomedical research community has a very different culture to the defense research community, mostly because most of what we do isn't super secret.
So like, what are you usually evaluating against at each of these kind of checkpoints?
So every program starts with defining a set of metrics and goals for, a year in. We want to be able to see that this is working or that's working. So if you take a program like Nitro, for instance, which is looking at osteoarthritis, it might be that, someone has a treatment, and that by the end of the first year, they're expected to have, been able to demonstrate in one patient that treatment is safe, or whatever. And then in the second year, it might be that demonstrate it's effective in 10 other patients. And if they can't do that, then that's when we say this is probably not going to work and stop. And so many of the programs have some kind of formal testing and independent testing involved in them. So in terms of the program managers, there's really a whole set of different phenotypes for them, and people of different ages. And you sort of see a sampling of our current program managers, with more in the pipeline. But the key thing they have in common is that they think like a CEO. They're given a budget, which is for their program, which is typically somewhere around about $50 to $100 million, and they're told go. And they have a lot of autonomy to make those decisions. They decide who gets awards. There's obviously some checks and balances in there, but they're making the decisions for their program. But if people are interested in they've got a great idea, then we're looking for a real diversity in our program managers, and of diversity of all kinds, but particularly in diversity of thinking and diversity of experience. Andrew Carney, the second from the top there, for instance, he's running the DigiHealth program and other cybersecurity related programs, versus Alana Hansru at the top there, who's running the PSI program for interventions in surgical interventions in cancer. Very different people, very different ideas, but all within the scope of what ARPA-H does. We look at problems from the perspective of these Hillmeyer questions. These are developed by DARPA, and there were 9 at DARPA, and now there's a 10th that we've added, 9th and 10th, which is ensuring equitable access and how the program may be misperceived or misused. Many lessons learned from the pandemic in these, but this is the way we think about all of our programs, and answering these questions are key to making a determination as to whether we're going to fund a program or not. We have 4 key sort of areas: health science futures, which is expanding what is actually possible. So the side program and Nitro, they're both within that group. I mostly work within resilient systems, which is about creating new capabilities and business models and all sorts of things so we can weather crises like pandemics. And so the data fabric component of that, for instance, is really about making sure that data is available. I'm sure many of you worked in data through the beginning of the pandemic, and you will remember how hard it was to get data, how hard it was to harmonize data, and we don't want to be in that position again. And so the data fabric is there. Scalable solutions, exactly what it says. How do we scale healthcare solutions across geography, manufacturing, data, information, all of those areas, so that we can make sure that we can effectively and cost effectively deliver solutions to the public. And then proactive health is really about preventative programs, where, how do we stop people getting sick and protect them from disease and stay ahead of them. So I mentioned a couple of these programs. You'll have the slide deck. I won't go through these in detail, but this sort of gives an idea of the diversity we have. DigiHeals is about digital healthcare security. And you can see areas there on, vulnerability discovery, testing of devices and system interactions and how we make those secure, implementation of common data formats and protocols in secure ways, protection against ransomware, all sorts of things that are really critical to reliably delivering healthcare, but a very different kind of program. I've mentioned the toolbox that I'm leading, which is we're currently reviewing many proposals right now. We were a little overwhelmed with the response. I know some of your companies have responded, and thank you. We hope to be sort of making decisions by sort of January, February timeframe. This is a new one that was recently launched, which is looking for using computational methods to identify targets for vaccines and treatments, so that we can, really fast track development of vaccines even more than we did with Operation Warp Speed, using a variety of technologies, not just mRNA. We made a whole bunch of awards on our Open BAA, and I won't go through these here, but again, you can see the diversity of the kinds of things that we're funding. Again, one of my favorites is this heart program. The whole idea of being able to 3D print a heart, to me, I find incredibly compelling. And so, but there are many others that are equally fascinating. So keep an eye out for more. There'll be more announcements coming out for Open BAA awards, but also new programs as new program managers join us. And then we've got a whole bunch of these are the programs from our program managers. Again, a whole variety of things just across the board of where we go. There's a variety of ways you can engage with us. If you've got an idea and you want to be a program manager, you can submit that. You can submit an idea to the Open BAA, and there'll be individual mission office BAA soon as well. But then you can collaborate. You can be a partner with us. You can partner with state governments, with academia, with whomever, and you can become part of the Hub and Spoke network. And all of that you can see by tracking the ARPA-H Vitals newsletter, which comes out every 2 weeks, and sort of gives you an update on where we are and what we're doing.
And so, like, just to take a step back from this piece, then, because I mean, it sounds like there's multiple elements, right? There's the idea of those who are actively involved in the healthcare space, have an idea for some kind of a technological advancement or solution that that probably needs some startup and innovative funding to kind of guide it from concept into completion or prototype. There's being able to come in as project manager. I feel like that third piece is that more tied to kind of like other organizations, other agencies, NGOs, contractors, those that are trying to engage with your group as well. Yeah, it's really about just all kinds of collaboration. One of the things that we do, I think that's a little bit different, is that we fairly regularly meet with companies who have ideas for collaboration, who recognize that there's a new program manager come in and they want to talk with them about, hey, we've got this idea and we want to sort of work with you on perhaps on it. And so there's a whole variety of ways that you can collaborate, not just competing on a BAA for
a slot as a performer.
Yeah. And you gave an interesting kind of summary at the beginning where you said, our problems, if you think if there's already a solution for it, or if you know the solution to it, then it's the wrong type of problem to come to ARPA-H with. So what exactly are the guardrails around? I mean, obviously you want to try to tackle the impossible to answer questions, but you're tackling with the intention of making the impossible possible. So what's the right set of guardrails of, innovative versus, having a plan and a strategy for how you're going to get there?
Yeah, so we don't do things where we just have no clue how we might approach it. The program manager, when they're developing a program, they're really identifying several potential avenues to get to where we need to get to. Again, the Hillmeyer questions. So, what is the state of the art? Where are we today? Then it says, what are the blockers to actually making progress? And so, a program will be designed typically to, address at least some of the blockers and make progress on it. We hope things will work, but these things, various approaches may not actually work.
Yeah.
And we're willing to accept that.
So basically, like, can't come to you and say I could reverse aging and that's it. But if you say I've got like a vision for, I don't know, using CRISPR to be able to like rebuild expiring telomeres and like extend human life, like that, now we've got more of a game plan on how we're going to get there.
Yeah. And so again, using the nitro example, there are various approaches that the program manager wants to look at, some using needle-based interventions, some using other not completely non-surgical medical interventions, and others. And so you'll see in if you go and look at the BAA for that, there's various technical areas which are defined to explore in each of those areas. Same with the data fabric. We have technical areas around extraction of data, AI to harmonize data, data exploration, and then the one we haven't solicited for yet is about how do we federate that and how do we make that work across scales.
So I want to address two questions that came in because I think they're kind of tied to some stuff that you just finished covering. One came from the VA, Jorge Ferrer. He was curious about how you're leveraging certain technologies like blockchain, DLT, to really solve domain-specific problems in healthcare interoperability, if that's something that's been kind of brought up in your space.
Yeah, so we've had several proposals come in using blockchain technology in particular. I personally see a lot of value in distributed ledger models, the whole immutability of it, for managing consent, for managing various other things within healthcare, and there were certainly a couple in the biomedical data fabric that proposals that came in that leverage blockchain. Is it a core strategy for what we're doing? I think at this point, no. But certainly I think we're exploring it. And part of my job is to actually sort of be connected with industry, connected with other agencies to understand how they're using things and where they see things going, so that we can be working synergistically with them.
Perfect. And then last one, Shunlei, she actually helps me co-lead our AI working group. She asked about what kind of, if you could give some more examples of what defines a performer in one of the previous slides, and like how many performers do you typically involve per program or in a program? So
the performers run the gamut from small businesses to large businesses to academia, to collaborations between academia and industry. In some cases, it may be sort of a direct collaboration that we arrange with, for instance, a national laboratory or another agency. I'm actually working at the moment on developing a program in conjunction with the FDA, where we will actually work together on developing what I think is a pretty innovative idea with CDRH. And so they run the gamut. And so to Jorge's question of how do we get involved, again, keep track of what we're doing. If you're a federal agency, then give me a call. Let's talk about how we can engage and how we might engage together. We have some specific authorities with FDA where we can actually we can send them funding to help offset costs and things. Because we know they need to be involved early in our programs. If they're going to develop a device or a drug, we really want to make sure that it's approvable. and having them engage at the beginning. But certainly, we're engaging with other parts of NIH, various institutes. Biomedical Data Fabric is a collaboration with NCI, and they've actually done their own solicitation for it through Frederick National Lab. But we're working with CDC. We have some other parts of VA. And yes, Jorge, I will send you a note and we'll chat and see where we might be able to work together.
Right. And one thing I wanted to do as well is I wanted to, I guess I appreciate that we've got this really great understanding of ARPA-H, what it is that you're doing, kind of some of the objectives and the mission of your work. I wanted to kind of start shifting us towards what brought us together, which was this conversation on AI and what role that's playing within, some of the transformative age. Do you have any thoughts or any kind of additional comments on
Yeah, so again, there are, I can't tell you how many proposals we've seen. Just give you a bit of perspective, we've had over 700 submissions to the Open BAA. There's a good number of them that involve AI in some form within them. It is certainly an area where we're investing, and in fact, we've actually just hired a program manager that will be focusing in various AI related activities. And so it's going to be central to what we do, absolutely. But just as drug development and other things are going to be central in other areas as well. And David seems to have frozen for me, but I'm not sure if it's frozen for anyone else.
No, he is frozen.
Okay. Well, with that, then I will move on to talking about AI. I will say at this point the usual disclaimer that in this section I'm expressing my opinions. They may not represent the opinions of ARPA-H or the Department of Health and Human Services. So if they don't like it, blame me. It's just me. So I sort of wanted to talk about, sort of do some baseline setting about, what is AI? Because it is many things. It's sort of, I want to give you a brief history. And by the way, of course, because I'm talking about AI, what did I use to help me generate this presentation? I used ChatGPT, probably just like most people would. And it was very, very helpful. But, the early concepts for AI started in the 50s and 60s, particularly Alan Turing, who had the concept of the machines that could think, and that the Turing test that he sort of expressed as a test for intelligence, is still kind of being used now, although is now being, I think, tested to its core by ChatGPT and other large language models. But really the first wave of AI in the 60s and 70s was about hard-coded rules and logic, like the ELIZA system, which was simulating a psychotherapist. They tried to use it for language translation, particularly from Russian, because there was a huge lack of Russian translators, and being in the middle of the Cold War, they really wanted to. It was a miserable failure. And what they realized is that these hard-coded rules and logic, they have no real understanding. They're limited to specific tasks they're programmed for, and so they had very limited benefit. And so it sort of went into this, AI winter, where there was very little investment in AI for quite some time. And a lot of that was due to, over-promising and under-delivering. We realized the complexity of mimicking human intelligence. In the late 80s, early 90s, I was building, connectionist systems, and I realized that there was just not enough CPU power in the entire world to be able to actually model what I needed to model in a reasonable way. But all of this really prompted, a shift from these hard-coded rules and logics towards a machine learning approach. And then obviously in the 2000s, 2010s, we've really got to this rise of machine learning and big data from the availability of data. But also computational power, the advent of GPUs and the massive parallelism that they can do, and then algorithms that learn from large data sets and to make decisions or predictions, and particularly connectionist systems, neural network methods that were abandoned in the 90s, which is when I was looking at them, they've really come to the fore because they are now possible thanks to GPUs and other, similar highly parallel, hardware optimized. And then really rapidly advancing in the last 10 years, particularly the last 2 or 3. I think, we've all seen what's happened with ChatGPT and orders of magnitude steps in complexity and capability, really focused around natural language and language processing, transformer models and large language models, and then diffusion models, particularly for image creating and editing, like DALL-E 3 and Stable Diffusion, which I'll talk about in a minute. Now, I think it's important that we remember history as we're in this very hyped time. There seems to be enormous promise from large language models and their ilk to do things. I think it's an open question as to will they actually result in the fundamental change that some people think, or will we find that there are just too many problems? And I'll talk about some of those issues there. Just in terms of a few definitions, because people get very tied up in what is artificial intelligence, what is machine learning. And so artificial intelligence is a general term for all the computational methods that attempt to mimic the characteristics of human intelligence: thought, learning, making decisions, making predictions. We talk about narrow AI, where there's specific problems, but then general AI, where it's an intelligence that can solve multiple problems and really is becoming more like a human thinking and learning capabilities. Machine learning is a specific type of AI in which algorithms are designed to learn from their data and improve over time, and particularly for making decisions or predictions. And there are many, many different algorithms that can be termed machine learning. People tend to associate it particularly with neural networks, but there are other methods for doing machine learning that are not neural network based. And onto neural networks, which really these connectionist systems, which are designed to they've somewhat modeled on the human brains, neurons and connections. And so you can see there on the left a micrograph. Actually, that's of a mouse brain rather than a human. But you can see, the nodes there of the neurons and all of the dendrites that are connecting them, the connections between them. And so mathematically on the right, we model those as nodes that have values, and connections between them which have weights, and some kind of transform function that will, for flowing from that x1 on the right over to the orange neuron on the right. There's some calculation that goes. It takes the value of the input neuron, weights it with the weights on the lines, and then calculates a value using various functions for that layer, and then that flows through into the output to produce a result. This is the same basic model that is used across large language models, across diffusion models, across all of them. They're connected in very different ways in some cases. In some cases, they're recurrent rather than just straight feed forward, which is what this diagram is. But they're basically all the same thing. There is an input, there is a set of weights with a transfer function, and then an output that comes to it with potentially multiple hidden layers. So what about deep learning? So we hear about this a lot. And so this is just a neural network which has got many layers of neurons. And when we talk about them being hidden, they're not an input or an output layer. They're somewhere in between. And you can have hundreds, thousands of hidden layers of different sizes and scales. This is where some of the voodoo of neural network design comes in. That you can see in this one, the input gets expanded out and then gets squished back together again, then expanded out. Often we've found that the performance of a neural network will improve if you actually force it through a smaller number of neurons. But this is what deep learning is really all about. It's training all of those weights. Each line represents a number and a transform function to produce the next one, and training it involves adjusting all of those weights to make your output to be what you want it to be based on a particular input. It's basically the same model that's just used across various things. They're just different architectures, different ways of connecting them, different ways of calculating the transfer functions for each of those weights. But you can see you very rapidly get to a huge number of calculations required, particularly for training. And particularly for large language models where you are in the billions of parameters, which each of those lines effectively here is a parameter. There's billions of those. It's computationally incredibly intensive, which is why you need GPUs, because these are inherently parallel, and the massive number of parallel calculations you can do in a modern GPU really just make deep learning models effective. So what about natural language processing? Well, it's another method of a branch of AI. It's focused on understanding and interpreting natural language. There have been many methods for it developed over the decades, but the fundamental problem has been that computers deal with numbers, and working with words is very difficult. But a sea change really occurred several years ago when Google invented the word-to-vec algorithm, which represents words as multidimensional vectors. And in large language models, you'll hear this term embedding. That embedding is just a numeric encoding of a word or a fragment of a word that describes it. And so you can see an example there of how you might, encode aardvark, black cat, duvet, and zombie. Where you can see that, the animal characteristics obviously is high for, aardvark and cat. Zombie, it's a little bit unclear, it might be an animal, but, fluffiness and dangerousness and spookiness could all be sort of represented as numbers. And what that means is that the similarity of words, the similarity of each of those semantics that are associated with the numbers can be measured mathematically by their distance from one another in space. And so in that example there's a four-dimensional space. You can see that, if you calculate the distance, i.e. the cross product between aardvark and cat, they're going to be close because, they have some characteristics. But also a cat and a duvet, there's some level of fluffiness, association with them. I
have a small question here on this one, by the way. Is this based off of public perception, or I'm assuming is how it creates the vectors?
So there is a whole, without going into the details of how word-to-vec works, it's not really driven by anything other than context of the words and the words around them, and it's essentially automatically generated. The things like animal and fluffiness are things that just emerge in it.
Well, and the reason I say it, and I'll jump in, because context is an interesting terminology for rating AI, right? I mean, you look at an aardvark actually is, believe it or not, actually a fairly dangerous and aggressive mammal with very sharp claws that it uses to dig, but it will use, aggressively against larger animals that approach it. So if a person were to approach an aardvark, it looks very cute, they might get sliced pretty badly. So, those are things that, and it's interesting just to see, similarly, not every person contextually would know that. Similarly, an AI could make, the same assumption. So that's kind of a unique methodology of how you train these things.
Yeah, and I think you will see as we move on to large language models that, the more information that you feed it in terms of training to develop these representations, which, they call an embedding, which you'll hear a lot talked about in large language model terminology. Embedding is just what is the vector for it, and these emerge out of the context from those millions of documents that have been used to train the models. So exactly describing what they are is difficult. You can see it and hear relatively easily. But when you're getting into thousands of values in the vectors, which is what the large language models use, it gets very difficult to actually comprehend what they are. In fact, I generally say that the embedding space within a large language model is just incomprehensible. No one can understand it because it's just based on all of those measurements. So what is generative AI? And so you'll hear this term a lot now. And these are AI models of various kinds that are designed to generate novel outputs based on their inputs. So we talk about prompts here, and so ChatGPT, Bard, BioBert, they're all text prompts. These are language models. You know, they can be prompted usually with text saying, you know, asking questions or chatting or whatever. But they can also, as in GPT-4, they can take images, audio, video as well, and you know, use those to generate text and images as a result. And then the other end, you kind of got the image generation models, which again, they create images based on prompts. So DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, to some of the biggest ones. They can be used to create new images, but also to edit existing ones. So, you know, in your iPhone or your Android, that can do, you know, background and object removal and things, it's using generative models in the phone to actually be able to do that. Those of you who've seen Adobe Photoshop with generative editing, where you can actually get it to synthesize objects for you into your image that you're editing, or just, you know, replace the background with something entirely different. They're all using these generative models. These are very, very large, multi-billion parameter models. In most cases, they use different algorithms for it. The diffusion model that's used in like DALL-E and Stable Diffusion is very, very different to the transformer models that are used in ChatGPT and things. And so this is where I think, you know, a lot of the interest is today. It is around these large language models, and it's a form of machine learning that uses the embeddings we talked about to represent language. And at their core, they're a predictor of just the next best word based on the context of their input. So, you know, a king is to a princess, a queen is to a. So the most likely, you know, word there is princess. And from all of the data that's been shoved into it, it can predict what is the next word, which seems very simple, but that's the core of what you know, ChatGPT and Bard, and I guess even Grok, you know, Elon Musk's new large language model can do. And on the right there, they're all based on this transformer model, which is really, they're transforming the input text into embeddings, and all the training has been turned into embeddings, and they're sort of represented by that little funnel there, which, you know, what does it mean? No one knows. It's just, there are billions of parameters. Every, you know, word is represented by thousands of numbers in the vector. So it's a, you know, some suggest that GPT-4 is on the order of 10 to 15,000 dimensions for the vectors. And it uses a variety of methods to transform it. In particular, with transformer models, there's this multi-head attention mechanism, which was really the innovation that made these far more effective than anything else that's been done before. And they really deal with context, being able to focus on the connections between words in a sentence, in a paragraph, in a large piece of text. You might have heard the term context window, and that's really the scope of the attention and the ability to, and that has really made these models able to have encoded knowledge about the relationships between words and how they're used together, so that simple prediction of you know, princess can be done with much more complex language, including, you know, prompts that are, you know, thousands of words long. They're trained using massive data sets, trillions of documents, you know, from the internet, from other places, but they are just these same things. The text is converted into this massive set of n-dimensional vector embeddings with thousands of dimensions, and we have billions of parameters. You know, Meta's Llama is available in like 7, 13, and 70 billion parameter models. OpenAI's GPT-3 was about 175 billion. Not actually publicly known how much GPT-4 has, but it's likely around 220 billion. And, you know, and OpenAI is continuing to scale. Maybe not at the you know, multiple orders of magnitude as they are today, but they are seeing the larger the model, the better the performance. But also be aware that, you know, there's some randomness in the outputs. It's not just predicting the best word, but it's got some randomness in it, to produce, quote, more natural and, quote, more compelling sounding text. So it's not just a simple, you know, dynamic, it just generates the right answer. And that's why if you run the same prompt through ChatGPT multiple times, you'll necessarily get different answers.
And
Some
I
may
think
be better than others.
this brings back, to the core element of like, and this is one of the things that, I mean, even the executive board was trying to guide around is, when you have so much, when you have this level of randomness and you have so many billions of parameters, right? You can't directly go and conflate every single, answer that's coming out. So where do you create that explainability and transparency to understand how the model is operating to ensure that the outputs are, ethically in alignment with what they should be?
Yeah, at that level, again, you're turning text into this, what is fundamentally an incomprehensible set of numeric vectors. No one could tell you exactly what a particular number within a vector means, because it probably has multiple meanings about relationships and about other things. And so this is an area which is ripe for research. An area where some of the programs that we do are likely to pursue things like, well, how do we use knowledge graphs that really represent ground truth with large language models to be able to validate what they're saying and what they're doing. Yeah. But the explainability is always going to be challenging. And I think you can see if you look at Bing Chat, for instance, which is based on GPT-4, the way that it operates is it uses prompt engineering to include results from Bing searches, using the Bing search essentially as some ground truth to be able to add to your prompt, to be able to then link to, okay, this is how it is, which is why Bing Chat will give you references essentially to Bing results when it's there. When you query it.
And I think that's at the core of it, right? Because I mean, just to give context for the people in the audience, I mean, if I was just to count to 1 billion, let alone 200, it would take me, I think, 31 some odd years right. Just to count at a rate of maybe number per second. So like it's physically impossible to go and double check into every single one of these parameters one by one. But realistically, I think it's really what you're speaking towards, right? How do we create the right set of guardrails? And then create the reference points as to what's driving that specific decision to then have a better control of the scope of answer or responses that you can build out.
Yeah, and I think one of the key messages that I want everyone to take away here is that there is a level at which it is just impossible to understand what is actually happening, and you either have to accept that, okay, it's producing good results. How do we make sure that those results are not going to cause harm, that they are the right results? Because, and I'll talk about this in a minute, the issue of confabulation or hallucination in large language models, because it's not going to be fully explainable. But again, this is an area ripe for research. We're going to be doing some of that research in the Biomedical Data Fabric program to try and understand and get to explainability for some things. But there'll be other programs that also explore that.
Yeah. But I mean, that's at the core of the terms of explainability in and of itself, right? Explainability does not mean, explicit like breakdowns of every single transaction that's occurred. It's, do we understand it well enough to be able to guide the decisions that led to this, right? And be able to influence the factors. I mean, and this applies to a lot of scales. So I think it can be scary for people to think, oh, we don't know how to fully explain it. But the reality is, no, well, there's more knowledge than not, right? It's impossible to sit down and explain that, but understanding and just almost accepting as part of the operating model, is I think key as well to building that trust and getting the right level of control around it.
Yeah, and we're starting to understand a little bit about how things work. So how does prompt engineering work? What happens when you tell ChatGPT in the beginning of a prompt, as they recommend you do, that you tell it kind of what persona it is that it's working? If you're telling it, okay, you're a biomedical data expert with expertise in DNA and other things, what's happening is that these multi-head attention modules are really, if you analyze them, you can see them essentially lighting up parts of the network that contain that knowledge. And so there's some level of understandability of generally how it works. you couldn't say specifically, but you can see if you examine the model, you can see that where the weights are, that certain areas within the network have captured certain domains of knowledge, and that they're being lit up by the various prompts. And that's why prompt engineering is so important to this, to be able to enable the model to focus on the right level of information, and that prompt engineering can make a huge difference to the efficacy of the model.
And I think that, I mean, if you think about it, that's at the core of, if we want to make comparisons, I mean, that's a core human interaction, right? You're going to make initial judgments on individuals that approach you based off of a series of factors, right? So the more context I know about the person I'm engaging with, there's going to be adjustments to what I'm going to speak to. If I know I'm talking to somebody who's an expert in a field who's been doing it for their entire career, versus somebody who is just maybe has a passing interest in a topic area, you're going to come in with different levels of context, and that's kind of what you're getting from these models.
Right. Exactly. And so, we're never going to get to full understanding of how they're doing it, but we get into general understanding and how to help them focus on where we're going. So I want to sort of give you some recommended reading. So this is a book by Peter Lee, Kerry Goldberg, and my friend Zach Kahani. Peter is a VP of Microsoft Research. Kerry's a science journalist at the New York Times, previously at WBUR, and Zach is a professor of bioinformatics and an MD at Harvard Medical School. Well worth reading. You get different perspectives. I think particularly Peter and Zach have somewhat different perspectives on how AI can be used in medicine and some of the issues with it. And I kind of want to leave you with this is something I actually replicated from a conversation that Zach had with GPT-4 in the book, in which he sort of gives this scenario of a woman presenting to the emergency department with abdominal pain and various other things. And then, what's your impression? And, it describes, roughly what it is, and then suggests that it's, highly suggestive of acute appendicitis. And then sort of looks at, what are the key points in the diagnosis that lead to that. But then it goes on to say that the clinical presentation is suggestive of appendicitis, but other differential diagnoses should be considered, including conditions like ectopic pregnancy, gastrointestinal infections, inflammatory bowel disease, and other causes. And then it recommends diagnostic imaging. An abdominal ultrasound or CT scan would be crucial next step to confirm it. Surgical consultation is advisable. This is pretty complex stuff. But prompt medical attention is essential to prevent complications like appendix rupture. And then he sort of goes on saying, thanks, I agree. I was thinking about ordering a CT scan right away, but since you're raising the possibility of pregnancy, maybe we should start with different imaging. And then it goes on, and its response is, yes, absolutely, consider the possibility of pregnancy, do a pregnancy test, do an ultrasound, because that may let you image things if it's an ectopic pregnancy, but also what you're going to get from MRI, what you're going to get from CT with different things. And again, this is directly out of the book on page 34, 35 and 36. I'd encourage you to go and read it, because there's many of these conversations that Zach in particular had with GPT-4 that I think are very compelling for how they could be used. And he, at the AMIA conference, the American Medical Informatics Association conference that I was at earlier in the week in New Orleans, he talked about this particular issue of the crisis in primary care, where we don't have enough primary care physicians. We're not graduating enough to keep going. It's particularly bad in rural areas, but Zach made note that Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston has just stopped taking any new primary care patients because they just can't. That's the most sophisticated medical community in the world, basically, and they can't. And so we're going to have this huge lack of primary care physicians. There are hopeful trends. We're seeing huge recruitment for physician's assistants and nurse practitioners. And he sort of raised the possibility of, well, maybe we can address this by equipping those nurse practitioners and physician assistants with AI to help fill in the knowledge they don't have from the fact that they haven't done 8 years in medical school. And yet, these are people who are coming out because they're more rapidly because they don't come out with massive amounts of medical school debt. Could we do this? Is this something that might help address that problem? Another example that Zach gave is this, visit transcription and summarization. I think my own primary care physician is doing this now. She has her phone sitting on the table as we talk and is focused on me. And he gave this sort of example of a primary care physician from Brigham and Women's who made the comment that, for the first time in 20 years, she spent 100% of the visit focused on her patient, not going back and forth to the EMR to add new information and into, whatever, and allowed the generative AI to do the transcription and summarization. Those are really positive things that could come out of it.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually incredibly impressive. I mean, like I said, it's great to see some of these use cases because, I mean, there's things like you mentioned that we would never have imagined that ARPA-H is working on and trying to recreate a human heart. But even something as something like this is much more behind the scenes that the average, patient or individual in the healthcare system probably won't even see, but could make such a huge difference on the effectiveness of a clinical visit. And improving the productivity of how these hospitals address these issues. So these are things that will definitely that have so much potential to change, the way that we drive and execute our healthcare. I thank you so much for this, Alastair. I know we're like right about a minute left on our time, so I don't know if there's anything specific you wanted to mention or cover. And there was another question about, how industry can be better educated to support ARPA-H that came from Young Kwan. So I don't know if you want to answer that little piece as well. Actually, sorry, that came from Perry.
Yeah, so just very briefly, the question is, are these risks worth it? Because we know about confabulation, the tendency of large language models to just make stuff up, but sound extremely authoritative. What happens if a nurse practitioner is treating someone and it just makes something up? It could kill someone. How would someone know? What could it be? Then there's the question of bias. Stable diffusion, when asked to draw pictures of doctors and nurses, it overwhelmingly creates images of male doctors and female nurses, the majority of whom are white. There's some concrete examples of, Dali was asked to draw pictures of women from different cultures. For the African woman, it drew a picture of a woman with a rifle slung over her shoulder, which is quite appalling. ChatGPT shows less, but they're still there, and we've got to deal with that. And these are really the risks. In terms of engagement, again, keep an eye out, subscribe to the newsletter. We post a lot on Twitter and LinkedIn if you want to know about what's going on. And we'd be very happy to, set up conversations with program managers if you've got focused areas where you want to sort of just talk about things, obviously outside the actual acquisition process. So there's a whole variety of ways that you can engage.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate this, Alastair. And like I said, I mean, this touches on a topic area that I wanted to see if we had some time for, but we ran out of it, which is, great example here is who is ultimately responsible when that LLM makes the mistake, right? Are we going to blame the LLM, or realistically, there's also a certified doctor or medical professional that should also be capable of interpreting that response. So, are we informing the doctor, and then is the doctor still responsible, or how do we manage those things? And I think that's a topic area that we're starting to address in our AI working group with ACT-IAC. We meet every Friday at 11 a.m. And one of the things that we're working on right now is an upcoming project as a response to some of the what was brought up in the recent executive order to help kind of, provide some additional feedback. So I welcome Alastair, if you ever want to join in, or anybody that's on this call, definitely come and feel free to send an email to Nancy Delanoche and she'll get you included in the group. But we're getting a lot of thanks from the group. It sounds like everybody really appreciated it. Alastair, you're a great asset to ARPA-H, and glad to have you continue to serve the American government in one way, shape, or form in the medical industry. So thanks so much for your time. I don't know if you have any final words.
No, just thanks for the invitation. I have about a dozen more slides. We will share the slides. I'll get them to someone to share. There's a few other thoughts in there as well.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating area. I was a skeptic sort of a year ago. I think I've shifted my thinking. I'm a lot more positive, but I'm also much more highly aware of the risks. And that's really where the research is needed.
Well, blame me for holding you up and asking questions, but thank you for, you know, all you were able to rush through, and look forward to hearing from you again.
You're welcome. Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care.
Bye-bye.